Warmly welcome to How to Write Heists in Fantasy, siding with lawbreakers and resistance fighters using examples from best-selling fantasy. This is Crime and Tension Techniques of Fantasy Writers, Part 3. And this is what we will be covering today. First, what is a heist? So we all start on the same page. Then, why are readers drawn to heists and what kind of emotion and experience are they looking for? And then, why does heist in a fantasy world have such a strong appeal? What do heist plot and fantasy world add to each other? Why or why not to include a heist plot or a heist subplot in your fantasy novel? And finally, how do you plan and write heist as main plot and heist as subplot? And our main focus is going to be on planning and writing the main plot and the subplot. First off, what's a heist story? It's the planning, execution, and aftermath of one large robbery. And sometimes people use caper and heist interchangeably, but caper is usually used with more light-hearted and humorous stories, and heists are more serious. And a few common characteristics are reader sympathy or respect for the criminals, the leader assembling a team, each member contributing a unique skill or trait needed to complete the job, and of course the "oh, it's impossible" line. So the object of the heist will be so well guarded that no one have ever succeeded before. This is also a very common convention of the heist story. And heists have a very broad appeal for a number of reasons. And some of these are high stakes makes it the thrill ride. There's a clear goal and a clear story structure, and that makes it easy to follow and engage in. And there's also the aspirational nature of the heists, the smart, cunning characters who work at the top of their abilities skillfully together like a clockwork. It makes it a little bit similar to the typical sports team movie. So Julian Hanisch, film professor, says one of the appeals is looking at the functional, well-oiled machine of social cooperation. There's also the found family trope, which goes very well together with a heist story. It can also be a flawed gang of society's misfits who is forced to work together with clear roles and personalities, and usually during the heist story they will come a more tightly knitted team. Then there's also cheering for the underdogs, which is a major appeal. Also, stealing something is a kind of crime that doesn't cause harm in the sense that somebody is physically hurt or killed. And then it's easier to feel sympathetic towards stealing something than the murder or assault story. And the journalist Duncan Campbell says, the heist film permits us to live vicariously as criminals, exciting risk takers who break the law without hurting anyone. The victimlessness, or as close to it as possible, is crucial in the mythologizing of a heist. And then there's also the Robin Hood fantasy, the anti-capitalist theme, where you side with the people who don't have a lot of money and who is forced to steal, perhaps. And Adam Epstein, journalist, says there is something about the modern era that makes viewer relish seeing wealthy people and institutions receive their comeuppance. So all these things taken into consideration, the heist is definitely one of the most beloved subgenres of the crime narrative. And the question we ask ourselves all the time in these presentations is why? To combine these genres. Why heist and fantasy in particular, instead of just enjoying them as separate genres? What makes them bigger than the sum of their parts, and what can they add to each other? And to answer this, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. So more than a decade before the film The Asphalt Jungle, so from 1950, almost single-handedly popularized the heist genre for mainstream cinema. There was a mastermind assembling a crew and looking for a master thief. Yeah, I'm sure you know what I'm going for here. To break into a dangerous guarded place and steal a highly priced object. So yeah, I'm coming back to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit because they are so important to the development of, as fantasy as a genre. So looking at these stories really makes us see like what do people associate with fantasy and what's the core of fantasy. And a lot of the heist tropes are actually very close to some of the biggest foundational stories of fantasy. And even the reverse of stealing something could be seen as a heist. So some of the similarities between the Lord of the Rings and the heist plot structure would be, of course, instead of gaining something, it would be destroying something, but doing something at a specific place you have to break into. And you have the object of great power that both the good and the bad guys seek. You have getting into the heavily guarded place. The obligatory moment of it's impossible. One does not simply walk into Mordor. Also recruiting the resistance gang with a range of abilities. You have my axe, you have my bow, and so on. You have the plan partly failing, which is also a convention. Breaking in is a process. So you have to use cunning methods such as using an insider and dressing up as orcs. Succeeding with great cost, and also the escape not according to plan. I'm really not saying that Tolkien stories has a complete overlap with the high structure. The emotional promise is quite different, of course. One is more adventure, wonder, and a heist will be more focused on the planning and intrigue. But my points are, fantasy has a long history of using certain story elements that they share with the heist. Fantasy and heist together have unique possibilities, and the heist structure works great in fantasy. So let's have a look at what heist and fantasy can add to each other. So instead of a slow info-dumpy world where nothing happens for hundreds of pages, a heist can give a fantasy story a clear task and a clear motivation for trying to achieve that task. There's also a recognizable structure that appeals to many readers, as I was just showing earlier. You have a clear antagonistic force and a way of showing the antagonism. You have high stakes and high tension. You can show magic powers through the heist crew, show the world building organically through the planning and execution of the heist. You can add surprises and twists, and it's also just plain fun, which I think a lot of people who love heists just think they're very entertaining to be part of. And fantasy can also add a lot to heists. It can add a lot of color and depth, um, giving giving the world something really unique, like unique worlds to explore and change by breaking in. And also giving the Heist members cool and interesting magical abilities. A very important reason for a lot of readers would be that an altruistic reason for a heist, for instance, overthrowing an evil ruler, makes readers deeply invested and more invested perhaps than people who just steal for their own gain. So the world stakes adds a lot to the heist and makes it even more exciting. And of course, with magic in your world, you can have a much more interesting heist object than money. And you also have the place connectedness and a feeling of something ancient, often with layers of history. So guarding the heist object can be, a more archetypical and older kind of structure than just a modern bank facility. And the appeal of heists in fantasy, as you can see, some of these points can be even stronger in fantasy. So the found family can have different magical powers that fills out each other. So together, you really show like a really cool group of people working together. There's also the cheering for the underdogs and a crime that doesn't cause harm. So if you have, if you create a fantasy world, you can also make a world where lawbreakers are the heroes. And the anti-capitalist Robin Hood fantasy is also something that in a fantasy world you can make this into an allegory where people in power are making these structures. So a little warning about writing a heist is that writing a heist is like doing a heist. Big investment, big gain. So if you're wondering about writing a heist and you're like, well, maybe I could do that, and just if you're not really motivated to put in the work, it's going to be a nightmare. Heists are a dream to read and a nightmare to write, according to one first-time heist writer that I read about. And it's just not for the faint of heart. For if your characters are going to have a master plan, you need a master plan for both your heroes and your villains. And the sheer amount of planning per scene is just, it's a lot. And unless you're a lot smarter than me, say if you write a book that has 50 scenes and the last 7 of them are a heist, you might actually spend more time planning those 7 heist scenes than the whole rest of the book. And just the amount of planning and plotting might be the most intense of any genres of what I've written myself. And characters has to outsmart each other in every move. So I really recommend teaming up with a writing friend or a coach who also writes it. Yeah, so it's really it's a challenge for sure. Also, it's not for the lazy of the world builders out there, because fantasy readers are discerning and they have seen it before. So you really need to add something new for it to be interesting and engaging and feel distinct. So if you want to set yourself up for success, you shouldn't take this lightly. Also, maybe surprisingly for some, it's really not for the people who are just into writing an exciting plot, because many readers they come for the dynamic between characters, and the way heist stories are a great vehicle for showing this dynamic. So if orchestrating a cast of characters isn't your strength or something that you enjoy doing, you might want to think twice about writing a full heist story. So I'm saying full heist story because if heist is your main plot during the whole book, the ensemble will be a big thing. Writing a heist subplot is a bit different, and I will come back to that point. So I hope I'm just scaring you a little bit, but that you want to do it anyway. And if you feel motivated to take up this challenge, you should definitely proceed. Some examples of the heist in popular fantasy as a main plot would be Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, Inception, and I'm just saying it's strictly not fantasy, depending on who you ask, but the reason I'm including that is it really shows the versatility of heists in science fiction and fantasy. We also have The Lies of Loclamora and Foundryside by Loclamora by Scott Lynch and Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. And then Heist as a subplot, Harry Potter, the Empyrean series, and Arcane are a few examples of that. And now let's dive into how to write the heist as main plot. My main example, which informs how to write heist as main plot, will be these three stories: Mistborn, Six of Crows, and Inception. And my reason for using Inception is that even though it's considered science fiction, it really uses the heist structure in interesting and imaginative ways, which we definitely want our heists in science and science fiction to do. Also, the technology, if you call it elixirs instead of chemicals, it would have a fantasy flavor instead of SF science fiction flavor. So the law of Arthur C. Clarke is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I'm throwing that ahead of me as a reason to use Inception. So planning the fantasy heist story, I'm going to use these as example, and the things we're going to go through is the heist object and the why, the motivation for getting it, the antagonistic force in what and who's guarding the object, world building for the heist, recruiting the gang with character orchestration, the plan, execution, and escape. And this is just at a glance a few tips about heist in fantasy. What's the object and why is it important for both the protagonist and the antagonist? And what does it say about the characters? How does it make sense for the antagonist to use magic to protect the object? Based on that, what magical skills does the protagonist need to recruit for their team? How can you, as the author, showcase your magical world through recruitment, training, and planning? And then, finally, let them plan the heist step by step, but to avoid repetition, only show the plan if it doesn't succeed. Let them succeed for a while, then show that they need to improvise, and Also, consider if your heist is going to have a cost. And we're going to get back to all of these things. So first off, the goal of the heist. Sometimes people call this a MacGuffin, especially from those who don't approve of using this literary device. And in real world heists, it's often money or something that can be exchanged for money, which I think is a little bit boring in itself. It's getting more interesting if the story focuses on what they can do with the money. For instance, giving your partner life-saving medical care would be like a stronger motivation and a very specific way of using the money. The motivation for doing a heist must be big enough for the whole team, and also big enough for your enemies to be interested in going through a whole lot to protect it. So motivation is really important, and as important as the object itself. And sometimes heist members go for this goal on behalf of themselves, and sometimes on behalf of another. So many times someone else is hiring the team, so they give a reward or something important back to the characters for fulfilling the job. So then there's a linking character who's giving the reward to the team. And in fantasy, the goal is usually an artifact, information, or a person. And the artifact usually gives some power to the antagonist or protagonist or both. Information is usually how it gives you advantage over the enemy. So both the artifact and the information has to be, a lot larger than itself, and represent something greater. And a person can be a goal in themselves, or they can stand for something bigger too. And in fantasy, a lot of the time, the highest goal can have the whole world at stake, plus something personal for the protagonist, which can be moral principles or gain, or getting out of difficult circumstances, or a vendetta towards the antagonist. So the magical artifact, so usually that would be getting something, retrieving something. Horcruxes in Harry Potter, the Philosopher's Stone too. In The Hobbit, the Arkenstone. Mistborn has the Atium, or it can be destroying something as the One Ring. And for all of these things, the real goal is actually overthrow or thwart the plans of an evil ruler. So with the Horcruxes and the One Ring, it's destroying the evil ruler directly. With the Atium, it's getting the power to do so. And with the Philosopher's Stone, it's keeping them from gaining power through this object. And you can also see the Arkenstone as, getting back the land stolen from a dragon, which is also like a kind of an evil ruler that has taken over your land. Information can also be the goal, and of course that needs to be very important information. It can be extracting information. So for instance, in Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, the general's battle map and all forbidden journals are both things that is kept from our protagonists. And in Inception, business secrets is what our main character is extracting from the minds of people. And then the opposite, planting information. So in Inception, it's planting the idea of dissolving a world-leading company. So in all of these cases, the information is about, winning in a major way, winning a war, whether it's a real war, so to speak, or a corporate war. And the information is called the heist. Is also a great choice if you want to bake a mystery together with the heist, because what's in the book or map or journal, what has the enemy been hiding from us. And finally, we have the person as the goal of the heist, which can be saving somebody or killing somebody. And in saving someone, we have the Princess Buttercup, for instance, in Princess Bride. We have Bu Yul Bayur. I hope I'm pronouncing that close to correct. So this is getting him out of the prison for the reason of preventing this dangerous drug to be exposed to the world. So this drug, Gerda Parham, has a lot of uses in this story. We also have saving Sirius in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. Even though that's a failed heist, it's still heist. Or a heist subplot. And then killing someone is also one of the heist goals in Mistborn, is killing the Lord Ruler. So sometimes the antagonist is luring the protagonist into a trap by kidnapping their dear ones, or pretend to do it, as in the Order of the Phoenix. Or it can be other innocents that the hero feels compelled to save. Sometimes it's breaking into a prison, freeing a criminal, or it could be killing someone who will decide the outcome of the whole world. Okay, so we need a goal for the heist, which is big enough and have big enough stakes for everyone involved, also for the reader. But we also need to protect the heist object. And here we come to the fun part, because in real life, what you typically do is do a lot of security research. Learning about high-tech alarm systems, surveillance, keys and passwords and guards and guns and everything. In fantasy, though, you can make something up. That's the good news. And the bad news is you gotta make something up. And that can take time. You want to make sure you have a solid magic system. And then you also want to see that the antagonist is using it for its worth, while also showing his personality in the strengths and weaknesses in the way he's guarding the object. And as an exercise, if guarding an object was the only way to show your antagonist in the whole story, what would we learn about them seeing their defense? And I think this is a very good way of really trying to use your creativity to the max to make something that's unique for your story. So an example of this would be Voldemort's cave, which is tied to his persona in many ways. It's a place he visited as a child. It's really hard to find, which shows the secrecy. So you can contrast that with Sauron's very imposing structures that are built to impress the power on his enemies. And Voldemort, he hides it instead. He's more sneaky and operating just on his own. There's also the Dark Waters, which is the Slytherin element. The Inferi shows his power over people he's killed. And the boat, which takes only one adult wizard, and it's not counting minors or house elves. And this really show his weakness is his arrogance in the way he disregards the people who will actually eventually defeat him. So this is a very specific way of guarding an object made by a very specific antagonist. So some things to consider is the location itself. It can be hard to get into, of course. Sometimes it's also hard to find, as Voldemort's cave. And making it hard can be the nature and the landscape itself is unwelcoming, or it's the building that's built to keep people out. And on the picture, this is a medieval fortification, which has a kind of archetypical feeling of protection. And researching a medieval fortress is a very nice and fun starting point. And it's fun to do some research on that because there's a lot of ways to keep out your intruders. But it shouldn't be your ending point. Ideally, you should make it more specific to your story, so not making it too generic. So things to consider is then mechanical protection, like booby tracks, secret chambers, labyrinthine structures to get lost in. Magical protection, always in fantasy. What magic does the antagonist have access to? How would they use it? And how can you show their style and strengths and weaknesses through the magical defense? Also, who guards it? Humans, other beings, monsters? What are their routines and working hours? And a great thing to do is to draw a map of the place and map out your protagonist movement in and out again. And the feeling that you want to give your reader is it's impossible. There's always the realist in the heist crew. In Mistborn, it's Dachshund saying, "This is insane, eh?" In Arthur in Inception, "This can't be done." And my favorite is Boromir in The Lord of the Rings. "Not with 10,000 men could you do this. It is folly." Oh, it's nice. Okay, a few examples. The Ice Court in Six of Crows. This is where the place they have to penetrate to get out this prisoner. And it's built in concentric circles, like the rings of a tree. It's a ring wall, the outer circle divided into 3 sectors. There's an ice moat, and then at the center of everything, there's this island, and the cliffs are unscalable. And the northern road is the only way in or out. So you see, this is really, really built to make it impossible to get into. And then we have Inception's dream levels. And this is another way to guard, where in this example, the guards is the person that whose mind they're getting into. The person's subconscious is trying to fight the intruder, much like the body's defense system against a virus. And I think that's a really cool way of solving this guard issue. And Inception also have a lot of levels, and the deeper into the subconscious, the more dangerous place to get lost in, both because of the time difference, the fragility of the perception of reality, and the unpredictability of the unconscious. So the deeper you go into this structure, for instance, the character Mal, who is the late wife of the main character, she takes over more and more the deeper they go into the subconscious places. And I really like this this quote from Six of Crows. It's built in concentric circles, like rings of a tree, because I think it's a really good way to think about the guarding of an heist object. To think of it as different levels, and as you make progress, it's a process. It's not, you can't just, there's not just one thing guarding it. It's different things on every level, which makes it more into a process. And it raises tension when you come further in, and you also get the feeling of like getting closer to the core of what the character is seeking and their deepest thing that is standing in their way. Yes, okay. World building criminality. This is going to be a little bit of a repetition from my first lecture, but just for a very short time. Crime is often taken for granted. Criminalization is making something illegal or punishable by law. So making something illegal is something that people in power do. What's being punished is, we can see it as two circles. One thing is harmful actions, like things that are really harming people, and the other circle is illegal actions. And in a good society, they would be very close to each other. In a heist story, a lot of the times what you would look for is some kind of over criminalization. A society that punishes too harshly and uses punishment to oppress people instead of actual crimes. And the Steel Ministry in Mistborn is a very good example of this. And in fantasy, it doesn't have to be like this. You can also have more like a medieval kind of setting. But a lot of the times you will want to have rules that the characters, your protagonists, are breaking to really put them in, to increase the stakes. And your characters who are breaking the law can do this out of necessity, gain, or moral reasons. And I've written here especially suitable for the world building genres, because in a fantasy story, you can create a context where people need to be criminal to do the right thing. So an example of necessity would be stealing for survival or being threatened into doing certain actions. So this is more closely aligned with the victim role. If it's gain, which is beyond survival, so money, resources, and power, it's more aligned with the villain role. And if you have moral reasons, which for many reasons readers are the most compelling reason, you will go more into the hero role. And a few examples of this would be Kelsier in Mistborn. His gang is plotting to kill the evil Lord Ruler and change society for oppressed groups. And in Throne of Glass series, the main character, Selena Sardothian, is not killing her assassination objects because she's not aligned with what her king wants her to do. And Harry Potter and Hermione creates a forbidden resistance club at school. So these are all different ways to have a certain ruler and resist that for moral reasons. And moral reasons is the most aspirational and what attracts a lot of fantasy readers to the genre. You want to see the good win, and you want to have this hopeful feeling that it's possible to defeat evil. But also, lots of readers want their heist characters to be morally gray. They want to see, to just follow criminals and gangsters and see them do their things for selfish reasons. And a lot of people think that's very fun too. And of course, these are just like very broad outlines. What often makes a story more interesting than just using one of these will be if your characters, different characters in the crew, have different reasons to join. For some people, it might be necessity. They needed to survive. They have no other means of surviving, for instance. And some maybe have more like they want it for gain or for power. And this can create a lot of possibility for conflict and tension throughout the story, and also development of the crew over the course of the story. And it's a good way to differentiate different characters in the crew. And then also within one character, you can have multiple reasons or changing reasons throughout the story. And this is a way to create a multi-layered personality and a character arc. So for instance, in Mistborn, Kelsier begins as this kind of a gentleman thief, but he becomes a prophet for a societal change. So he becomes more of a hero. And Vin starts as a victim. She's stealing to survive. She lives out in the streets, but she also grows into wanting to be part of the change. So they grow from kind of a villain or victim role into a hero role. And then the fun part, or everything is the fun part, but one of them is certainly recruiting the crew. Usually you will have one person who has the role of leader and mastermind. And usually this person does some of these things or all of them: initiating the heist, recruiting, planning, and leading. And in Mistborn, there's Kelsier. Six of Crows has Kaz Brecker. Inception has Dominic Cobb. So Kelsier, Kaz, and Cobb. They also need to have a name that starts with a K sound, apparently. So the leader of the crew, many times that will also be the main character, like in Inception, but it doesn't have to be the main character. So in Mistborn, you can argue that Vin is the main character, even though Kelsier also has a lot of point of view. And also in Six of Crows, this is a very ensemble-oriented story. So Kaz is just one of a lot of characters who all have their different points of view. So the mastermind can be the main character or one of main characters. And a common mistake would be making him so powerful that he doesn't actually need the crew. And in fantasy, you really have to check your magic powers to make sure that, it has to be hard for the main character to actually do the heist. And they also, if they could do it themselves, they wouldn't need a crew. So they need to, the crew members need to fill out the things that the main character can't do themselves. And the gentleman thief is maybe the kind of typical archetype, very close to what we call the trickster archetype. And if you want to go deep into this kind of character, You can go and research this trickster archetype, which is like found in mythology all over the world. So this picture here is from Mr. P's Mythopedia, which is a Facebook page about world mythology. But the leader is just one person, and readers who read heist stories, they usually love ensembles, and this is one of the main appeal of heist stories. They love to see their interactions, both if they know each other intimately and already have like a fun tone, or if they're meeting for the first time. They love to hear their humor and banter, and see them planning to make use of their specialties and working as a team. Also to see them use specific skills in cool ways, like different kind of magic, both separately and together. They love to experience different personalities, and a lot of readers really like this dynamic of seeing them go from hating each other to working together and to saving each other's lives in the end. And a very common mistake and something to look out for would be making the crew members too similar to each other. But there are lots of ways to differentiate characters. You can give them different motivation for the heist, give them different amount of motivation. So some people are really into it and some has to be convinced over and over again. It's a good tension and conflict potential. Also, it can be a different experience. For some, it's their last job. For others, it might be the first, like with Kelsier and Vin in Mistborn. A nice way could be to research personality types such as Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, which are like predefined personality types as a starting point. And these kind of personality types, like they're not in the field of psychology maybe a little bit frowned upon, because you just put people into different boxes, which is not the the goal of psychology. But for differentiating characters, it can be a great tool. Also, you can make them come from different parts of your world, it can also be, different fantasy races like dwarves from the mountains and hobbits from the Shire, or in Mistborn it would be Mistings and Terracemen. And also you can let their magical abilities lead when creating their personalities. So for instance, in Six of Crows, Jesper, his magical abilities aren't so developed, and this makes his magic become unpredictable. And he's also a character who has trouble, keeping his impulses in check. He loves to gamble and so on. So his personality and his magic powers are kind of in tune with each other. Another example, Mistborn, the character Breeze, his ability is to influence other people's emotions, and he's also like a very smooth talker. So when his main ability is to manipulate other people's emotions, he also makes this into his personal philosophy that manipulating people is just a way of life and something that people do a lot anyway. So he really likes to make other people work for him. So he's like this more smooth person in the backseat, so to speak. So I hope this gives you some ideas on creating your crew. So let's move into the planning stage. And This is a great time when you write a heist in a fantasy world to do some really smart world showing. So when the protagonist learns and talks about what they're up against, for instance, in Mistborn in chapter 6, it's like a masterclass in using heist planning to show parts of the world. Because Kelser is like, okay, we have this problem, how do we deal with this, how we deal with this? And as they discuss these things, the reader learns about the world and the way the final empire works and how it enforces the Lord Ruler's power, and also how to bring it down. And the planning stage also overlaps with crew getting to know each other, and the reader get to know the crew, of course, and see what they can do. So you can show their magical powers and other abilities in training. And if you have a character learning about these things, like Vin in Mistborn, the reader also learns along with this character, with her. And the final note on planning: don't show the plan if everything goes according to plan. Because if you show a plan and then you show it work, it's just repetition. And tension falls when you actually want tension to rise. So if you do have a plan and they follow the plan for a while, and then something happened that makes the plan go off rails, that's great. Then you rise tension when tension is needed. So let's go into the execution and escape. A space I've written here, but escape is, of course, what I mean. So usually there's 3 stages. First, it's the sneaking stage, as I call it, where things start according to plan. And this is important because if you start out with like not a single thing goes according to plan, the crew will look very incompetent, and you want to avoid that. And also you keep tension up by letting them succeed for a while, because the readers will like bite their nails, and for how long will they be able to keep up this and hide. So at some point things will start to not go according to plan, and this is when antagonists start to notice something's amiss, and then the protagonist needs to improvise. And here an extra cool thing is that maybe they can't follow their plan anymore, but if they use what they have rehearsed in new and creative ways as they go, that's really satisfying for the reader. And this is the place for attacks and counterattacks and diversions and desperate actions, like throwing a bomb and running in the other direction to divert attention, for instance. And the escape part is usually the most improvised part, and usually the antagonists by now know who's in the building and chases after them. So then it's just, the thrilling escape. And 2 other things to consider is that a cost will make the stakes feel more real, which can be losing something valuable. So for instance, in the subplot heists, the Gringotts heist in the 7th Harry Potter books, the protagonist get the Horcrux, the cup, but they also lose the sword, which they could have used to destroy it. So they get something and they lose something. Also, usually crew will be injured some way, and you can even have someone sacrificing themselves, which will give the heist even more gravitas. And another thing to consider is that protagonists can unexpectedly help someone. For instance, in Harry Potter again, then in the Ministry Heist, they help people who need to flee, like the so-called mudbloods that are being interrogated by the Ministry. They help them flee also as part of the heist, and this makes us root more for the protagonists. Yeah, and just another point on the sacrifice thing is, of course, if you have a crew that starts with, being almost enemies, or if they come into the heist for selfish reasons, if they then sacrifice themselves for the other crew members, that's like a really, really big arc for the group and for the character. Yeah, okay, so that's as main plots. And it's also possible to write a heist as a subplot, and I will go into how you can do that and what it can add to your fantasy story. So I'm going to use Harry Potter, Arcane, League of Legends, and the Empyrean series here. So these are 3 things that heist subplots can add to your story. The first is ramping up the tension and meeting the antagonist towards the end. So having an end heist. It can also be another part in the story where you want tension to rise, for instance, before a major change. A heist subplot can also focus on the consequences or the cost if you want to move the characters or the world to a worse place and to raise tension through that. And then there's the plot coupon, which sounds a little bit gimmicky, like, just playing a video game from the 90s, perhaps. But this can be actually a way to let side characters shine and to show a long and arduous task. And I will get more into how you can do that. So, as we said in the beginning, a heist is the planning, execution, and aftermath of one large robbery. But in a subplot heist, usually you will leave the planning stage out, and then you can ask, is this still a heist then? And my answer in this context would be that it's useful for the author to think of it as a heist, because then you can learn to use the same techniques and just use the ones that is useful for your story. Just as, if you even if you're not writing a mystery, you might have a plot twist and therefore learn how to build red herrings and clues. So I call it a subplot heist, even though like certain parts of the heist might be missing. So the typical thing that the heist subplot leaves out would be recruiting the gang and the plan. Because it just doesn't have the space to develop it in such detail. And usually then, instead of recruiting people, it will be using characters you already have. And instead of making a plan, because then it takes too much space of the story. So you can they can plan still, but you just don't see them plan. This is how the Ministry heist works, for instance. Like 1 chapter later, they have a plan and they go. And they have planned for a month, but we don't see them planning. Or you can also let your characters move directly into execution and just improvise everything. So one way of using the heist subplot is to end the story this way. And this is the classic for a reason, because the ending is where you want tension to be as the highest point, and making it into a heist subplot is a very natural way to arrange for the protagonist to meet and fight the antagonist. As you can see here in Harry Potter, this is the most tense part of the story, when they go through all these different chambers to face Voldemort in the end. And the Harry Potter series ends the story with a heist subplot. You can argue with me if this is a heist subplot or not in some instances, but I'd still say that it's breaking into a guarded place and retrieving an object. In the first book, it would be breaking into the third floor corridor with all these different chambers, retrieving the Philosopher's Stone. In the second one, breaking into the Chamber of Secrets, rescuing Ginny. The fifth book, breaking into the Ministry and rescuing Sirius, which is a failed heist, but it's still a heist structure. And in the sixth book, it's breaking into Voldemort's cave and getting the Horcrux locket, which also is a fail at great cost. And you can see as the book series progresses and the character gets older and things get more serious, it's more costs and fails. So that's ending with a heist subplot, which is a great way of using a heist subplot. Another is to focus on the cost and consequences rather than the wins, because sometimes the cost is just higher than the gain, and you can rise the stakes by making the protagonist end up in a worse place than before the heist. So the cost and consequences becomes the main reason to use the heist for the story. And this is usually done in the beginning or the middle of the story to deepen the conflict. And on this picture, we see Arcane and this little group of teenagers, or kids really. They try to do like a little robbery there in the beginning. But their attempt ends in, like, first off, they lose what they stole when they encounter another street gang. And this sets things in motion that is really straining the whole relationship between the posh part of the city, Piltover, and the poor part, Zaun. And also this failing plants the seed in Powder, the blue-haired person in the middle, to become the feared criminal Jinx, because everybody blames her for failing, and she starts to become bitter. So this is the ending of the whole series. It's the first episode. So it's really kind of inverting the heist, the whole feeling that heists usually give, where the characters succeed at great odds, or poor odds. I mean, so instead they just fail altogether, and this is just starting to put bad things into motion. In Iron Flame, the sequel to Fourth Wing, the rebels plan to steal forbidden journals from a library, and as a result of this, Violet, our protagonist, is captured and almost tortured to death. And by rescuing her, the rebels disclose their conflict against the Bascaeth War College, so they need to leave and rebuild life somewhere else. So getting these journals is... the cost of this is just throwing their whole lives up in the air, and they need to rearrange everything. So there is a gain, but the cost is what maybe fuels the story most. And finally, we have the heist subplot as plot coupons. And this is a great thing for a long series, because you can have similarities, but variations also. And in Deathly Hallows, the heists, the Gringotts heist and the Ministry heist, creates peaks of tension in a long story. And every time they do a heist and they go into what is now enemy territory, like the Ministry and Diagon Alley, they see the world under Voldemort change for the worse. So you also show a lot of world building with every heist, and the antagonist working toward to political control. And also it just shows the enormity of the task of destroying all of Voldemort Horcruxes, and show the enormity of him as an antagonist. And one of the best points, I think, is instead of seeing Harry always facing the evil alone, having these subplot heists and then destroying the Horcruxes can let other characters have their heroic moments. So this is stressing the importance of friendship and working together to really do this enormous task. So, good luck, my thief, with your grand schemes and plots. And if you do want some company or need some help from a dedicated crew member, or if you want to plot even worse deeds, look no further. Yes, so I'm Ina Nes, aka your magical mystery coach, a writer and a book coach passionate about crime and fantasy. And we have one part left now, part 4, thriller and tension techniques in fantasy. And if you're interested in that, please fill in the form and I will let you know when it's available. And I also work as a book coach, so if you want to learn more about this and how to work on these things in your own story, you can contact me, or just contact me and if you want to talk more about these topics, because I love all input. So thanks a lot for listening to this presentation. I hope you got some inspiration and are feeling energized to start on your heist.